On March 14, 1820, the first son of Carlo Alberto di Savoia, Prince of Carignano, and Maria Teresa di Lorena, daughter of Ferdinando III, Grand Duke of Tuscany, was born in Turin at the ancestral palace of the Savoy Carignano. He was baptized with the name Vittorio Emanuele Maria Alberto Eugenio Ferdinando. 1821, 20th of March. Vittorio Emanuele joins his father, Carlo Alberto, with his mother in Florence from Turin. Following the Carbonari uprisings in Turin in 1821, which led to the abdication of Vittorio Emanuele I, Carlo Alberto, already appointed regent by his cousin as there were no other male children, and being the last descendant of the main branch of the House of Savoy, was forced to leave the court of Turin and move to Novara. Due to his involvement in the Turin disorders, where in the absence of the king during the Turin uprisings, he even granted a liberal constitution. The new king Carlo Felice, 1765 to 1831, younger brother of the previous king, King of Sardinia since 1821, with strongly conservative ideas, doubting the loyalty of his distant cousin from the Carignano branch, sent him an order in Novara, instructing him to move with his wife and the tiny newborn Vittorio Emanuele entirely out of the kingdom, to Tuscany, to Florence, the capital of the Grand Duchy ruled by Vittorio's maternal grandfather, Ferdinando III of Tuscany. 1822, 16th of September, the little Vittorio Emanuele, in his grandfather's villa in Poggio Imperiale, is at risk of burning in the crib of his room that caught fire due to a candle left lit during the night. He is saved by the nurse who, however, dies in the flames. How could the nurse have died and not the baby? Many wondered. Besides this initial doubt, from an early age, there was a great somatic difference with his father, and he also grew up with short stature, as an adult, less than 1.60 meters. He was stocky, unlike his father, Carlo Alberto, who was thin, tall, 2 meters tall. As was also tall and thin, his brother Ferdinando, later Duke of Genoa, father of Margherita who will marry her cousin Umberto I, son of Vittorio Emanuele himself, and therefore by his side Queen of Italy. Ferdinando died young at 33 years old in 1855, leaving his 25-year-old widow Elisabetta di Sassonia, whom Cavour, calling her the superb beauty of the north, wanted to marry to Vittorio Emanuele, who was widowed, make him end his relationship with Bella Rosina. We will talk about this later. Elisabetta was left with 2 children, a boy named Tommaso and a girl Margherita, who would later marry her cousin Umberto at the age of 17 in 1868. Then when he became king in 1878, she became the first queen of United Italy, 1851 to 1926. The Tudors also wondered where this little prince came from when they found he had a hard head. They complained about his laziness, lack of application in languages, mathematics, history, and grammar, and lack even in simple reading. In short, he was resistant to studying. From a young age, he preferred books of all kinds: horses, swords, weapons, hunting excursions in the countryside, woods, and mountains. The same mother kept repeating and writing, "Where on earth did this son come from? He was born to make us all despair." But even more, people wondered when the child became a young boy with a physical constitution that had nothing in common with his ancestors, not to mention his character. He had tenacity and firmness, unlike his hypochondriac father, who was always indecisive, and for this reason, he received the nickname King Waverer, and by Carducci Italo Amleto for his dark, conflicting, and enigmatic character. He was often struck by religious, mystical crises, with the court always crowded with about 50 religious people. Vittorio Emanuele, on the other hand, was a bit rough. However, he possessed virile vigor. He was cheerful, courageous, bold, and sometimes reckless, even though he was communicative and friendly like a commoner with whom he willingly socialized during his countryside escapades while hunting. Later, as heir apparent and then king, he also had a straightforward, intuitive adherence to pragmatic ways inspired by common sense, far from the subtleties of the politics previously followed by his Savoy predecessors. In short, he physically and mentally, we say today, had a different DNA. He was religious like his father but without mystical crises, in a commoner's way. A bit rough, he felt and thought as an adult, more comfortable with the Piedmontese dialect than with the Italian language. He was a passionate hunter of game and women before and after marrying the Austrian, and having 5 children with her. Regarding the numerous lovers and numerous illegitimate children, Massimo d'Azeglio will say that he deserved more than the title of Father of Italy, title of Father of Italians, for the trail of illegitimate children he left behind. Not to mention his tastes in everyday life, preferred an ordinary bean soup to the decadent court lunches. He seemed like a commoner in the way he dressed. He was sloppy inside and outside the palace, and he was almost always outdoors with his dog and his rifle. Many doubts, if not mysteries, were nourished about that fire and the child's rescue. The first was that of a sketchy report by Corporal Galuzzo, servant attached to the Count's house, about how the fire had developed and how the nurse's death and the strange rescue of the child had occurred. The second, when Massimo d'Azeglio later came out, saying that not only did he not believe that the prince had been saved, but according to him, the little prince had died burned together with his nurse, and had then been hastily replaced with another child, son of a butcher, whose name he even mentioned. The name Tanaka circulated. In the same days as the fire, this man had reported the disappearance of his child of the same age. Then, nothing more was heard of this report. Suddenly, the butcher became wealthy. This gossip story was forgotten, but when the king began to make some banal mistakes in addition to his commoner behavior, some were ready to remember. What do you expect? He's the son of a butcher. Even if, perhaps, he wasn't. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. 1824, May 17th. Vittorio Emanuele returns to Turin with his family after a 3-year stay in Tuscany. He is 4 years old. 1830, January 1st. Vittorio Emanuele is entrusted for education to Count Cesare di Saluzzo, appointed governor of the 2 little princes. 1831, January 24th. Vittorio Emanuele, at 11 years old, is appointed lieutenant in the Royal Piedmont Cavalry Regiment. 1831, April 27th. Vittorio Emanuele becomes heir apparent to the crown of Sardinia, as his father succeeded Carlo Felice, the last of the family of the eldest Bran. 1831, May 8th. Vittorio Emanuele is appointed aide-de-camp captain in the Savoy Brigade. 1831, May 12th. Vittorio Emanuele receives the title of Duke of Savoy from his father, Carlo Alberto. 1832, January 1st. Vittorio Emanuele is appointed aide-de-camp captain in the 1st Regiment of the Savoy Brigade. 1834, March 13th. Vittorio Emanuele is appointed aide-de-camp major in the same regiment. 1836, December 24th. Vittorio Emanuele is enrolled in the Supreme Order of the Most Holy Annunciation. 1836, December 24th. Vittorio Emanuele is appointed lieutenant colonel in the same regiment. 1839, March 14th. The Duke of Savoy, at 19 years old, completes his youth education and establishes his military household. From this moment on, his life is entirely military. He rarely appears at the Turin court. 1839, April 14th. The Duke of Savoy assumes command of said regiment of the Savoy Brigade. 1841, April 13th. The Duke of Savoy travels with his father to visit Sardinia. 1842, March 15th. The Duke of Savoy is appointed significant general and retains command of said regiment. 1842, April 12th. The 22-year-old Duke of Savoy, Vittorio Emanuele, marries his 20-year-old cousin Maria Adelaide of Asburg-Lorraine in the chapel of the Royal Stupinigi Castle. Daughter of the Viceroy Ranieri and Elisabetta da Savoia-Carignano, she was the niece of her father-in-law Carlo Alberto, who at the same time was also her uncle, being the brother of his mother, Maria Elisabetta di Savoia-Carignano. These marriages with the maiden of the House of Habsburg did not please those who secretly aimed at something other than binding themselves to the feared and hated power. She was Austrian, but she was not ugly at all. But her behavior, style, and class were all Habsburg. Certainly not a commoner or an adventurer. Prince Vittorio, she gave birth to 8 children in 12 years, before and even after her husband's passion for the commoner, adventurer, as Cavour called Bella Rosina. 1843, March 2nd. Princess Clotilde Maria Theresa of Savoy, the firstborn of the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele, is born in Turin. 1844, March 14th, Umberto Ranieri Carlo Emanuele of Savoy, future king, Prince of Piedmont and son of the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele, is born in Turin. 1845, May 13th, Amedeo Ferdinando Maria of Savoy, Duke of Aosta and son of the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele, is born in Turin. 1846, July 11th, Oddone Eugenio Maria of Savoy, Duke of Monferrato and son of the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele, is born in Racconigi. 1846, September 28th, the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele is appointed Lieutenant General by his father. 1847, October 16th, Maria Pia of Savoy, daughter of the Duke of Savoy Vittorio Emanuele, is born in Turin. 3 more children will follow during and after the adventure. She died at the age of 33 in 1855, after giving birth to her last child 12 days earlier. 1847, October-December, the 28-year-old Duke of Savoy, with his wife and already 5 young children, during his hunting expeditions, becomes passionately infatuated with 14-year-old Rosa Versalana, the Bella Rosina, a provocative peasant girl, daughter of an old retired soldier. He returns to visit her several times in clandestine encounters. This girl, who often walks barefoot, with her slimness and audacity, but also with a substantial charge of sensuality, has made him lose sleep. We remember that having a relationship with a minor was a crime, which at that time was set at 16 years old. However, laws do not apply to the powerful. 1848, March, while Milan is in turmoil and on the verge of its 5 days, he kidnaps the Bella Rosina. Her father reports the kidnapping, but he is soon silenced. He hosts her in the hunting lodge of Stupinigi, consumes her until Rosina becomes pregnant, and she will give birth after 9 months, on December 2nd, to a baby girl, Vittoria. The girl was born on June 11, 1833, so she had not yet turned 15 when she became pregnant in March. The Austrian wife Adelaide, who already has 5 children, aged 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, suffers the disgrace. Still, in Austria, the contempt is total, later joined by that of Count Cavour, who will do everything to make him separate from what he calls an adventurer. 1848, March 24th. The Duke of Savoy, Vittorio Emanuele, assumes command of the Reserve Division and leaves with his father for Lombardy for the First War of Independence. Now let's look at the situation of the Kingdom of Sardinia, with its economic, political, and demographic structure, before the year 1848, before the Risorgimento Wars carried out by the House of Savoy. On March 23, 1848, King Charles Albert of Savoy led a coalition of Italian states and declared war on Austria to conquer the Lombard-Venetian kingdom. But in Lombardy on March 18th, Milan had already risen against the Austrian Empire with its 5 days, forcing the Austrians to retreat to Verona. On March 22nd, Venice also expelled the Austrians and proclaimed the Republic of San Marco. 1848, April 25th. King Charles Albert and Duke of Savoy Victor Emmanuel crossed the Mincio with much delay. They have also refused the support of irregular volunteers who are ready to fight. 1848, April 30th. King Charles Albert and Duke of Savoy Victor Emmanuel participate in the Battle of Pastrengo. 1848, May 30th. Duke of Savoy Victor Emmanuel is slightly wounded in the Battle of Goito. Then they retreat before the Austrians, who do not give up, although they do not insist on the confrontation. 1848, November 16th. King Charles Albert and Duke of Savoy Victor Emmanuel, retreating from Milan, establish their headquarters in Alessandria, where they spend the winter. Meanwhile, during the same winter, the Austrians in Verona reinforced themselves with troops arriving from Austria via the convenient Veneto railway. Someone said, while the Savoyards were inactive in Milan, counting the votes useful for taking power in the Lombard city, the Austrians were counting soldiers in Peschiera, in anticipation of the next counterattack. Instead of stopping in Milan, the Savoyards should have pursued them to Verona when the Austrians still lacked reinforcements, a grave mistake that later had severe consequences. 1849, March 20 to 21st, and the night of March 22nd, the Savoyards resumed hostilities with a general, Ramarino. Afterward, all the blame was placed on him, and he was also condemned. After a violent battle, Lost, near Novara, the Austrians moved to the banks of the Sesia, just one step away from the Piedmontese border, and begin to cross the river. At that point, to avoid a total defeat and the loss of the Kingdom of Savoy, Charles Albert sent General Luigi Faccia di Cassato to negotiate surrender with Austria. The conditions are harsh, with the Austrians seriously threatening to enter Piedmont. On the same night, just before midnight, Charles Albert abdicates and leaves for exile in Portugal. 1849, March 23rd, Duke of Savoy Victor Emmanuel succeeds to the throne after the Battle of Novara, following the defeat and abdication of King Charles Albert. 1849, March 24th, Victor Emmanuel has a meeting in Vignale with Marshal Radetzky to negotiate surrender with the Austrians again and to establish more lenient conditions for the truce. 1849, March 26, Victor Emmanuel signs the armistice known as the Novara Armistice in Borgo Monero. After the Battle of Novara and the abdication of Charles Albert, March 23, 49, Victor Emanuel suddenly found himself on the throne of Sardinia at a difficult time for the country, and with himself unprepared for the affairs of government, which, he, always in the barracks, his father had never transferred to him. Vittorio Emanuele had to begin his reign by simply listening to what the Austrians dictated. Due to the impossibility of continuing the war, he had to sign the harsh conditions and the Armistice of Vignale, March 24, 49, with the Austrian Marshal Radetzky. The political skill boasted in this situation by Vittorio Emanuele's panegyrists is a legend. That is, it was the firmness and skill of the new king in the negotiations for the Armistice of Vignale that saved Piedmont from an Austrian invasion. Much more realistic is the fact that Radetzky and the Austrian court were neither enchanted by his firmness, nor were they generous. They allowed him to remain in power as the ruler of Piedmont, albeit conditioned by other demands, only to avoid throwing the Savoyards and their army into the arms of the hated France and the hands of the anti-Austrian Piedmontese revolutionaries. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. The significant political difficulty for the new king was the hostility of the majority Democratic Chamber of Deputies to ratify the peace treaty with Radetzky, which included, among other things, the obligation to reimburse the Austrians for war damages with the astronomical sum 75 million French francs. To overcome the opposition of the chamber, Vittorio Emanuele reached the extreme limit of constitutional correctness, but he had already promised it to the Austrians, and they had menacingly stationed themselves at the fortress of Alessandria in case of failure. He therefore proclaimed Moncalieri, November 20, 49, in which he dissolved the chamber while preserving the constitution, which did not bother the Austrians at all, as they had a similar one. 1849, March 27th, Vittorio Emanuele issues a proclamation to the nation announcing the preservation of paternal institutions, Albertine Statute. 1849, March 29th, Vittorio Emanuele swears the Constitution before Parliament. 1849, May 7th, Vittorio Emanuele appoints Massimo D'Azeglio as Prime Minister. Ironically, he will later describe the king's following proclamation in Moncalieri as uncertain liberalism. 1849, July 3rd, Vittorio Emanuele, still recovering from his wound in Goito, proclaims convalescence from Moncalieri, inviting his subjects to help him consolidate the constitutional institutions. 1849, July 28th, ex-King Carlo Alberto, Vittorio Emanuele's father, dies in Oporto 4 months after his abdication. 1849, July 30th, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the 4th legislature of Parliament. 1849, August 20th, Vittorio Emanuele ratifies the peace treaty, already signed in Milan on August 6. 1849, November 20th, Vittorio Emanuele dissolves the chamber, which is hostile to him for making peace with the Austrians, and publishes the Proclamation of Moncalieri. 1949, December 3rd, Bella Rosina, now 15 years old, gives birth to a child fathered by the king, a girl named Vittoria, after 9 months. 1849, December 20th, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the second session of the 4th Legislature of Parliament. 1850, April 9th, Vittorio Emanuele sanctions the Sardi Law, the abolition of some privileges related to the Church. The supporter of the law, intensely disliked by Pope Pius IX, was Count Cavour, who had been in Parliament since June 48. The relationship between the Papal State and the House of Savoy deteriorates. 1850. October 12, Vittorio Emanuele appoints Count Cavour as Minister of Agriculture and Commerce. The following year, in 1851, he also assumed the position of Minister of Finance in the D'Azeglio government. Then, on November 4, 1852, he became the Prime Minister of the Kingdom. 1851, March 16, Bella Rosina continues her clandestine relationship with the king and gives birth to another son named Emmanuel. 1852, March 4, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the 33rd session of the 4th Legislature of Parliament. 1852, November 2nd of 4th, Vittorio Emanuele, despite his aversion towards him, appoints Count Cavour as the Prime Minister of the Kingdom, who promoted the so-called connubio, a marriage agreement between two factions of Parliament, the centre-right led by Cavour, whom he calls liberal, and the centre-left led by Ratazzi. For the king, these will be 8 years of undisguised impatience, also due to personal reasons, with the politician who will always cause controversy within the parliamentary group. Not to mention the lack of sympathy from Massimo d'Azeglio and the equally undisguised antipathy from the king himself, and especially from Garibaldi, not to mention the antipathy of Pope Pius IX. As the leader of the majority, Cavour was a promoter of anti-clerical liberalism, which included the suppression of religious orders and the confiscation of all their assets. He even proposed to the Pope to renounce temporal power and consequently the renunciation of the Papal State and Rome itself. When the king was struck by several bereavements, his mother, wife, and brother, within just 3 months of 55, the clericals took advantage of it, claiming that these bereavements were manifestations of divine anger against the ongoing anti-ecclesiastical reforms. 1853, December 19th, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the VIF legislature. 1854, February 20th. Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the railway from Turin to Genoa. It was desired and promoted by Cavour with English capital and technology. Cavour, the creator and promoter of numerous commercial exchanges and many industrial, banking, and agricultural associations, was not only an essential landowner in Lari, but also the promoter of a crucial electoral law that remained valid even after his death, until 1882. In addition to being the promoter of the connubio, the unique marriage between the center-right and center-left, which allowed him to take the presidency of the chamber and govern as he pleased. Often ignoring even King Vittorio Emanuele, whom he disliked, he arrogantly ruled with the support of his majority for 8 years. 1855, January 12th, Queen Maria Theresa, the widow of Turin, mother of Vittorio Emanuele, dies. 1855, January 20th, Queen Maria Adelaide, consort of Vittorio Emanuele, dies in Turin. She leaves 8 children, just teenagers aged 14, 13, 10, 9, 4, and 3, and a newborn born on January 8. 1855, February 10th, Prince Ferdinando, Duke of Genoa, brother of Vittorio Emanuele, dies at 33 in Turin. The young Elisabetta di Sassonia, who is not yet 25 years old and has 2 children, becomes a widow. April 14th, Vittorio Emanuele distributes flags to the troops leaving for Crimea in Alessandria. A war desired by Cavour to have a say in Europe and make the Kingdom of Sardinia a respected European power. On this occasion, even Vittorio Emanuele seemed somewhat favorable to the conflict. In the meetings in Paris to join the excellent coalition for the war in Crimea, Cavour played his cards of seduction with his sparkling cousin, the 20-year-old Nicchia, a famous Countess of Castiglione. See her story here. By frequenting the court, Cavour had the opportunity for over a year to study this young, frivolous but intelligent, vain but fascinating cousin, always at the center of attention at court, and according to some gossip, another occasional young lover of the king. As the great connoisseur of his human soul, Cavour thought of exploiting these qualities. Nicchia, then 20 years old, by sending her to Paris with her charm, but above all with her ambition, could have influenced the soul of the recently crowned Emperor of the French, Napoleon III, who was sensitive to female beauty and therefore convert him to the Italian cause, in any case, in line with the most famous uncle. We remember that after the Restoration, Napoleon III, son of Luigi Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon Bonaparte, had taken refuge in Rome from France. A member of the Carbonari, he had been expelled from the Papal State. Later, he became its protector, not out of conversion, but to prevent the Savoyard from becoming too powerful. He then took refuge in Florence, where he joined the rebels during the 1831 uprising. With the Revolution of 48, he returned to France. By presenting a republican program, he managed to win the elections and become president of the Second Republic, establishing himself with a strong government. 4 years later, in 52, at the age of 44, he was proclaimed emperor. Because of his past, he was called the Crowned Revolutionary, but also sarcastically, Napoleon the Little, by V. Hugo. The subsequent relations with the Kingdom of Sardinia could have been more apparent, as we will see later. Perhaps he wanted to be emperor in Italy as well. But he not only had the king against him, somewhat distrustful of him, but also another person, perhaps with the same ideas, Cavour. The Frenchman perhaps wanted to restore that of Napoleon first, that is, to bring the county of Nice and Savoy back under France and Piedmont, which in Napoleonic times, let us remember, had been part of France. Cavour, while maintaining contacts with him, feared that the ally could become the master. I do not want him to reign in Piedmont as in France, since, after having called him here, I must, more than anyone else, safeguard the Kingdom of Sardinia from any usurpation. From Selmore's diary at the time of the Franco-Piedmontese alliance in 1859. And let's go back to him. Cavour. The beauty and ambition of Nikia could easily have overcome the weakness of the emperor, who, among other things, had already met her during a stay in Florence, where she, as a young teenager, strolled along the Lungarno, gathering admirers, enchanted by her budding beauty, so much so that she was called the Only One. In short, Cavour wanted to get the beautiful Nikia between the sheets and, with her help, marry his cause, which was then an alliance for participation in the Crimean War and a subsequent war against the Austrians. Having launched the project together, when saying goodbye to her, he had told her, "Try to succeed, dear cousin, by whatever means you deem appropriate, but succeed." Conquering with the means was easy. She was 20 years old, he was almost 50. Soon enough, the emperor fell at her feet. The beautiful Nikia had the means, and she used them. The usual gossip mongers of the French court were ruthless, labeling her as the Golden Vulva. But even the jealous wife, Eugenia, did not hold back. In one of the many theatrical entrances of her rival, who appeared in the salons with a heart-shaped pendant on her belly just below the belt, she maliciously pointed her out to her ladies. There she has her heart. In short, Cavour's mission was successful. The alliance was accomplished. Thus, the Crimean War was planned with Cavour's opportunistic political motivations. On January 26, 1855, the final adherence of the Kingdom of Sardinia to the Anglo-French Treaty was signed. On March 4, 1855, Cavour declared war on Russia, like the others, and on April 25, 15,000 men set sail from La Spezia for Crimea. The war caused the Piedmontese to suffer a massive loss of soldiers, but Cavour did not obtain the agreed territorial compensations. However, solely due to his participation, the Kingdom of Sardinia became a respected power in Europe. So much so that they were presented as such due to the legitimate complaints of the population about the presence of Austrians on their soil. Other bellicose projects by Cavour were considered by foreign states. However, the English dissociated themselves and wanted to remain neutral. But Cavour was only interested in France's adherence to unleash his war against the Austrian. For this adherence, in addition to the mission of the Nikia with her means, there was later the Plombieres interview and another mission, for reasons of state. The sacrifice of Clotilde, 15-year-old, the favorite daughter of Vittorio Emanuele, we will mention later. 1855, November 20th, Vittorio Emanuele leaves Turin to visit Napoleon III. Cavour paved the way, although the king did not sympathize with the former crowned revolutionary. 1858, July 20th. Minister Cavour has the historic 8-hour meeting with Napoleon III at Plombieres, a conference in which the final agreements were made for the imminent war to begin in the new year, It was indeed established, among other things, that if Austria were to wage war against Piedmont again, France would come to its aid and ensure that it obtained a state of 12 million inhabitants in Upper Italy, with Savoy and Nice being ceded to France in return. Nicomede Bianchi, il Conte di Cavour, Revidi delle Recenti Avventure d'Italia. At Plombieres, Cavour and Napoleon also decided on the marriage between the latter's cousin, Giuseppe Bonaparte, and Maria Clotilde di Savoy, a 15-year-old favorite daughter of Vittorio Emanuele, only to strengthen relations with the French, given the upcoming war, but many said that it was a sacrifice. Even Vittorio Emanuele was not in favor, but Cavour's state reasons prevailed, and so did the demands of the crowned revolutionary. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. 1859, January 10th, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurates the sixth session of the 6th legislature with a proud speech challenging Austria. He addressed the Sardinian parliament with the famous phrase of the cry of pain of the Piedmontese who had suffered from Austrian oppression for 10 years. A state, he said, that could have constituted a threat to the governments of all Europe. 1859, January 18th, Vittorio Emanuele signs the alliance treaty with France. War is imminent. Only his daughter's sacrificial marriage is missing. 1859, January 30th, Clotilde of Savoy, the king's favorite daughter, only 15 years old, marries Prince Napoleon, ugly, arrogant, with a bad reputation. This was the sacrifice imposed by Cavour to maintain good relations and have the support of the crowned revolutionary Napoleon III. Prince of Hesse writes to his sister, Empress Maria of Russia, "Poor victim of politics, the Savoy sacrifices his lovely 15-year-old daughter to a man like Prince Napoleon, immoral, despised in France by all honest people and ridiculed by everyone, only for the hope of being able to conquer some square kilometers of territory with the help of France." Letter from Alessandro Dacia to Empress Maria of Russia, January 30th, 1859, document at Waltham Castle. The commoners of Turin commented, "It's nice to be the king's daughters, but then look who you end up in bed with." 1859, April 11th, after the death of his wife, after 4 years of mourning, Vittorio Emanuele breaks the hesitation and brings in the beautiful Rosina to the palace. He appoints her Countess of Mirafiori, property near Turin. Later, the heirs will sell it to Agnelli, who will build the Fiat factories on that land. Cavour, consistently hostile to this scandalous relationship between the king and the adventuress, continues intervening to end it. He would like the widowed king to marry some maiden from European courts, perhaps even from an enemy nation, aiming for good foreign diplomatic relations, for the reasons of state, or at least marry his cousin, Elisabetta of Saxony, not yet 27 years old, with 2 children, and wife of his brother Ferdinando, recently widowed. He asks for a meeting with the king to discuss this matter and the relationship with La Rosina, which Cavour tells him is not honorable for the House of Savoy. Vittorio Emanuele agrees to the meeting, but when he lets him in, he sits in an armchair with La Rosina on his lap. And he is peremptory. "I don't want to hear about getting married. My Rosina is enough for me." Cavour has to retreat. The beautiful, now 24 years old, the adventuress, has won. But so has he, the king, and credit must be given to Vittorio Emanuele for his attachment, with the reason of the heart, to his young lover. Proof of this is that when her life was in danger, he wanted to marry her religiously and later, a few months before his death, also civilly. It was, in short, a union with a decidedly affectionate relationship, not the usual woman of pleasure, or worse, those unions of maidens from other European courts imposed by the reasons of state, and often a parental union to consolidate the dynasty. And his behavior was, therefore, human. What is surprising, however, is that he did not stop the marriage of his beloved young daughter to the cousin prince of Napoleon III. Nor did he say no later when his son Umberto married the 17-year-old Margherita, daughter of his brother Ferdinando. It was a bizarre consanguineous marriage, certainly not for reasons of the heart, but for dynastic reason. Umberto, since he was 24 years old, the year before the marriage with his cousin, fell in love with a young woman. Then, even though a son was born to him, future Vittorio Emanuele III, his attention was all for his lover, the famous Countess Lita, with whom he also had a son. Possessive lover seems to have demanded a singular promise from Umberto, that he would no longer have any relationship with his wife and that their nights should remain white. To make them whiter than white, the same consort caught her husband in bed with Lita in her room. She wanted to leave him, divorce, go back to her mother, and confided and complained to her father, Vittorio Emanuele II, who, accustomed to these things, upon learning of his daughter-in-law's niece's trivial concern, candidly said to her, "And just for this, you want to leave him?" The woman accepted the reality, but was full of resentment. Like his father, the bond between Umberto and his lover lasted a lifetime. His wife Margherita, a lover of high society, didn't worry too much about this unusual coexistence. She committed herself to being only the queen. She became immediately after the Porta Pia breach in 1870. Umberto and Margherita were in fact the ones at court and in the palaces of Roman high society representing the king who abhorred worldliness, but also because of his relationship with the commoner, much opposed by the nobility in the capital of the former Papal State, all of the former clerical caste, so-called black nobility. However, the wife had a noble heart towards Umberto. When her husband was assassinated in 1900, she allowed the Tita to rush to his deathbed to give her husband, but also her lover, a final farewell. Meanwhile, they forbade Bella Rosina from doing so towards Vittorio Emanuele II. As for Umberto, he died in Monza in 1900, assassinated by an anarchist out of revenge, a certain Bresci, who had even come from America, disgusted by the award given by the king to General Bava Beccaris, who on May 7, 1898, had carried out a massacre, over 100 dead and 500 injured. By ordering the use of cannons against the crowd in Milan to disperse a popular demonstration protesting the sharp increase in bread prices. But this was not an isolated incident. He had already experienced 2 attacks, even without severe consequences. A staunch conservative, fiercely opposed to his rigid conservatism, he always supported ultra-conservative governments. Always inclined towards repression, he had, to increase his prestige in foreign politics, allied Triple Alliance of 1882 with 2 conservative powers to ensure the dominance of the House of Savoy, being a staunch enemy of Republican movements. However, far from guaranteeing peace, the signing of the Triple Alliance caused an increase in international tension and increased military spending in Italy. Due to Umberto's militaristic obsession, who wanted an armed force equal to the formidable Prussian war machine, the poor Italian taxpayer had to bear increasingly growing expenses. When he went to Austria in Vienna, he had Austrian maternal DNA, so he felt at ease. The not-so-distant adversary of the House of Savoy, Franz Joseph, granted him the honorary rank of colonel of the 28th Austrian Infantry Regiment. The same regiment had participated in the Battle of Novara in 1849 and had carried out a ruthless repression in Brescia during the 10 days that caused the death of thousands of civilians. While at the gala lunch in the Vienna Hall and the Kaisermesse, Umberto first toasted and showed off his Austrian colonel's uniform. In Novara, Milan, and Brescia, there were still orphans who that regiment had caused. The gesture did not fail to provoke anger in Italy among public opinion. And here is the comment in the Illustrazione Italiana of December. Umberto disguised as a colonel of an Austrian regiment? It's a theatrical effect, and it suddenly leaves us with the impression of a punch in the stomach. Perhaps even his grandfather Carlo Alberto, who was in exile in Oporto a few days before his death, had left written, for Umberto, there had been disastrous colonial wars in Africa, with a massacre of men that led the Italians to demand an end to the African adventure. An authoritarian attitude marked his entire political activity, and in the uprisings and riots, he signed with his authority harsh measures of the state of siege and repression. Like in Milan, with the order to shoot as well. The severe episode was followed by a solid authoritarian turn worthy of the detested Austrians. They dissolved socialist organizations, Catholic ones, and radical ones. They closed the chambers of labor and the workers' leagues, limited freedom of the press of assembly, and many were accused of subversive propaganda or simply for having harshly commented on the facts and had to flee abroad. All this lasted 2 years. Umberto even rewarded Beccaris for his criminal behavior. Then the indignant Bresci arrived in Monza to empty a whole magazine into his chest, to avenge, he said, the dead of Milan, and the insult to the same dead done by Umberto, rewarding General Beccaris. Thus, Umberto paid with his life for the mistakes and faults of an unpopular and unfortunate policy, which aroused fierce struggles and implacable hatred, and ended with revenge. Vittorio Emanuele II, in his life, had been mild, never authoritarian in his attitudes. He was communicative by nature and affable. We have written above that he possessed a frank, instinctive adherence to pragmatic ways, inspired by common sense, far from the subtleties of the politics previously followed by his Savoy predecessors. Furthermore, he had tenacity, firmness, and great courage. At the same time, his son was an inconsistent, arid, insecure person with limited ideas, with a fixed idea pro-Austrian, the repression of republicans to preserve authority. His reign was one of cynicism and approximation, a man without character, of profound ignorance, with a total absence of culture, inherited from his grandfather. He had never read a book in his entire life. It was divine right, providence, that guided his steps, so there was no need for intellectuals and human geniuses to alter the course of his existence. Umberto was very attached to his mother, Austria. He was 11 years old when she prematurely passed away, causing him deep trauma. However, like his father, he loved women and extramarital relationships, and here arises the doubt. From his commoner father, he inherited a part of his DNA, and from his mother, the Austrian DNA. And the Austrians were masters of repression and authoritarianism. Even the only son he had with Margherita, Vittorio Emanuele III, was even smaller and clumsier than his grandfather, from whom he presumably inherited half of his DNA, and the other half from his Austrian grandmother and father, since he too had limited ideas to preserve the throne. During fascism, in 1915, he broke the triple alliance made by his father with the Austrians. His grandfather's hatred for them resurfaced. He paradoxically allied himself with France, attacking them with his Cadorna, and it was a massacre for Italy. 600,000 dead. Italy won, but with the Americans, who then sent us the bill together with the British, debts until 1988. The agreement between Italy and America was signed in Washington in November 1925, and the agreement with England was signed in London in January 1926. Italy had to pay America $1 million per year for the first 5 years, $14 million per year for 25 years, and $50 million for another 32 years, reaching $1,975 million. Italy had to pay England £2 million for the first year, $4 million for the second and third years, $4.5 million for 58 years, and $2.25 million for the 62nd year, for £272,250,000. At the time of the agreement, a war debt was calculated distributed over 3 generations of Italians until 1988. Far from a victory. The debts of the disastrous Second World War, the loss of its colonies, and the cession of many Italian territories for U.S. bases in Italy were added. Enslaved by fascism in 1940, the king, the declaration of war bears his signature, attacked France again when Paris was already on its knees before Hitler's armies. This time for the little king, not only metaphorically, it ended very badly, also leading to the end, after almost 1,000 years, of the House of Savoy. He hit the jackpot. Regarding his escape from Rome, leaving the Italian army in disarray, let us remember the words of his grandfather to Napoleon III. The faith profoundly moves me. The love that this noble and unfortunate people of mine has placed in me. Rather than fail them, I break my sword and cast aside my crown like my august father, Carlo Alberto. It fits perfectly with the escape of September 8, 1943, by his grandson, Vittorio Emanuele III, with the difference that he did not throw away the crown. He lost it dishonorably on the road to escape. This is what many Italians think, obviously excluding the nostalgic monarchists. And yet, just a few days before, on September 3rd, he assured German ambassador Rudolf Rahn, "Tell the Führer that Italy will never surrender. It is bound to Germany for life and for death." Yes, the death of Italians, After his gesture, with the subsequent civil war, the resistance, the bombings of the enemies then, Allied liberators, on civilians, more deaths than in the war itself. We wrote about Cavour's moralism towards the king, that relationship with La Rosina who told him it is not honorable. But it's not that he disdained the few honorable encounters with young maidens. It's just that for him, unmarried, those were only mercenary encounters. But perhaps the last of these encounters was even more dishonorable. Indeed, possibly, it was fatal for him. See, was Cavour assassinated? 1859, April 27th, Vittorio Emanuele addresses the army with a proclamation inciting war against Austria. 1859, May 1st, Vittorio Emanuele leaves Turin for the headquarters in San Salvatore Monferrato. 1859, May 31st, Vittorio Emanuele leads the Battle of Palestro. 1859, June 8th, Vittorio Emanuele enters Milan with Napoleon III. Together, they start the war and march against the Austrians. 1859, June 24th, Vittorio Emanuele leads the Battle of San Martino. The battles between Solferino and San Martino are decisive. But Napoleon III, observing a situation that did not follow the plans of Plombieres, and starting to doubt that his ally only wanted to conquer Lombardy, was prompted, he said, by his wife to return to France because she feared a Prussian invasion from. July 5th, negotiations began to conclude an armistice with Austria, which Vittorio Emanuele II, without being called to those negotiations, had to sign later. The same thing will happen in Veneto in 1866. 1859, July 11th, Vittorio Emanuele and Villabalzana received the paper to sign with the unjust armistice of Villafranca. Cavour rushed from Piedmont after a whole day's ride. He arrived in Villabalzana late in the evening. After reading the truce, the king handed him. He almost attacked the king. "We started the war also to take Veneto. You must not sign this rubbish. If you do, I will resign." Then, in a fit of anger, Cavour invited the sovereign for dignity to abdicate as well. "I have to think about that myself, as I am the king," replied Vittorio Emanuele. And Cavour arrogantly said, "The king, the true king at this moment is me." Who is the king? He is nothing but a rascal. However, we also have another version from Kossuth, Napoleon's man, present at the scene of the battle agreement at Villafranca in 1859. Cavour lost his temper during a stormy late-night conversation with the king, as Vittorio Emanuele accepted the treaty's terms even before it was signed. In a fit of rage and possibly on the verge of resigning, Cavour immediately offered to step down. In his anger, he went so far as to suggest that the king should also abdicate. When Vittorio Emanuele replied that he was still the king and it was his job, Cavour, defeated and hot-headed, stormed out, turned sour, even cruel. "The Italian king did not look at the king, but at me. The real king is me." Vittorio Emanuele, though offended, the mastermind Cavour, the revolutionary, should have done so. In Parliament, he allied with the left wing, the right wing, the Democrats, the weak and the strong, rebels and everyone. He used Garibaldi, king, enemies as friends, turning friends into enemies of other friends. He ignited many sparks to start a war, threatened everyone a bit, and invented not an alliance but subordination, meaning obedience to the Kingdom of Savoy, all to provide a monarchical solution for the unification of Italy. If he were still alive, provocative statement above might have been an unconfirmed plan to turn it into a personal kingdom like Napoleon III's. He was also influenced by Alexandrite. The most significant criticism that the Democratic Party directed at Cavour was that he exploited revolutionary forces by stealing equipment to threaten Garibaldi with his army, creating a desert around Mazzini, and only then did he shine, even at the cost of starting a world war and, if necessary, even dragging Russia and America into conflict. "One day, Italy will conquer the world," he declared, "and if needed, we will set Europe on fire." The British were horrified when Cavour, despite not being attacked by any foreign power and having no threatened honor at stake, deliberately provoked a significant conflict in Europe. This conflict could have harmed everyone else. Cavour, letters edited and unpublished, edited by El Ciala, Turin, 1883-87, Volume 6, page 307. Where will Cavour end up after the planned battle in Veneto? To Vienna, as he promised La Marmora. Perhaps he will be king, and why not emperor? Ultimately, when young, the enemy, Napoleon III, was also a revolutionary. and he used revolutionaries to seize power. Let's not forget the tumultuous conversation at Villafranca with that arrogant man, "I am the true king." At that time, the king was wiser than Cavour. He realized that deploying his small army against the Austrian forces, which had a superior number at the Battle of Solferino, would be like risking everything they had achieved in Lombardy over 10 years of hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice. On July 13, 1859, after the armistice agreement was signed, Vittorio Emanuele sent greetings from Milan to the people who were now his subjects in Lombardy. On July 20, 1859, Vittorio Emanuele summoned La Marmora and Ratazzi to the government. On August 7, 1859, Vittorio Emanuele solemnly visited Milan and other cities in Lombardy. On September 3, 1859, Vittorio Emanuele received a delegation from Tuscany in Turin requesting to merge with the kingdom. On September 15, 1859, Vittorio Emanuele met delegations from Parma and Modena in Turin, who also requested to join the kingdom. On September 24, 1859, Vittorio Emanuele welcomed a delegation from the Army Corps in Monza, requesting to merge into the kingdom. On January 16, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele summoned Cavour back to the government after receiving gentle advice during his vacation in the countryside. The British pushed back Vittorio Emanuele. Still, they were unaware of his attack in southern Italy, especially in Sicily, where the British had economic interests and agendas. They proposed independence and a constitution similar to the British constitution for Sicilian. On March 24, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele signed an agreement with France to cede Savoy and Nice. Garibaldi, who was from Nice, was furious as he tried to organize a referendum, but was obstructed and failed. On April 1, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele signed a sad farewell declaration with the people of Savoy and Nice. Garibaldi was furious, while Cavour was pleased as everything was going according to his plan. However, these plans did not include Garibaldi's next expedition to Sicily. Someone cruel and malicious insinuated that Napoleon III later avenged Cavour's actions first at Monzambano, and then in Sicily by allying with Italy through a surprise referendum. I cast my vote, but the ballot was marked yes from The Leopard by Count Lampedusa. It seems he repaid his debt with Nietzsche's average coin through a young woman with a pleasant face, the wife of a police officer, perhaps from Paris, who also came to Turin on a mission. Other wicked individuals suggest that for similar reasons, Garibaldi also breathed a sigh of relief when he learned, few months after Cavour's premature death, as he and Farina had encroached on independence rights. Instead, Garibaldi supported the English who wanted to provide for the people of Sicily. Speaking of Nice and Sicily, we must return to the negotiations at Plombieres with the historic conference between Cavour and Napoleon III. And we will continue until Cavour's passing. The 8-hour conference between Cavour and Napoleon III, known as the Colloquium of Plombieres, has become famous in history. During this meeting, final arrangements were made for the upcoming war, which was set to begin in 1859, starting from Lombardy. In essence, it was determined that if Austria were to wage war against Piedmont, France would assist this country and ensure that the ruling house of Savoy gained a state with 12 million people in the upper regions of Italy, seen as compensation for France. In his work, Theo de la Rive proposed the Plombieres Agreement, which involved establishing a northern kingdom in Italy up to the Adriatic, including the duchies of Parma and Modena, thus giving Piedmont a population of 12 million. Tuscany would be expanded with part of the papal territory, while Savoy and Nice were ceded to Piedmont as compensation for France, which would have to protect it in case of invasion by Austria. Therefore, at Plombieres, the anti-Austrian battle was decided, and its purpose was clearly defined. A plot against Austria and other governments on the peninsula took place at Plombieres. At that time, Italy was made up of several countries: the Kingdom of Sardinia, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the south, Papal States in central Italy, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Lombardy Veneto with Venice under Austrian rule, the Duchy of Parma and Piacenza, the Duchy of Modena and Lucca, which was annexed to Tuscany and mostly under Austrian protection. Cavour wrote a letter to General La Marmora that appeared with La Marmora's signature in the above-mentioned collection. In point 2, Count Cavour's intentions in the letter are apparent. The purpose of the war is to expel the Austrians from Italy and the constitution of the Kingdom of Upper Italy, including the entire Po Valley, without mentioning anything about the south. La Marmora then continued. It was agreed that peace would only be signed in Vienna, and to achieve this goal, a force of 300,000 troops was mobilized. Napoleon was willing to send 200,000 soldiers to Italy, while 100,000 Italian troops had to be deployed there. And he concluded, "If the king allows his daughter to marry Prince Napoleon, I can almost certainly say that he will be in Vienna as the leader of our victorious army within 2 years." Garibaldi was furious when the above-mentioned war ended with the Villafranca peace treaty, officially conceding Nice and Savoy to France. During a parliamentary session on April 12th, when everything had become irreversible and public, Garibaldi's furious criticisms regarding Nice took place. Unfazed, Cavour responded to Garibaldi, ceding Nice and Savoy to France was not an isolated issue, but a reality in a series of events that had been completed and needed to be fulfilled. Garibaldi was enraged and wanted to go to Nice to incite the people to say no in a vague and ambiguous referendum. Still, the king intervened to calm the general down and persuade him not to appear in Nice to prevent the situation from escalating. However, besides the issue of Nice, the question of the invasion of the south was also developing at that time, which Garibaldi himself was preparing for with his 1,000 gathering almost everywhere. Though informed in secret, Vittorio Emanuele distanced himself, not agreeing with the demands regarding men and means that Garibaldi desired, but also allowing the revolutionary leader to follow his famous impulse. After setting aside the issue of Nice and Arezzo, Garibaldi went to Genoa and then to Quarto to prepare. In May 1960, Cavour took advantage of these tactics. He was angry and wanted to confront the king to clarify his intentions and dark schemes. He talked to us and wrote a letter to him, saying that after his words yesterday, any minister should resign. However, I am not just a minister because I still have too many duties for the kingdom and Italy. I am waiting for specific communication from His Majesty. After the fact, the politicians were informed about the expedition's departure, leaving them no time to hinder it, let alone assist it. He will never help for political reasons, and primarily because he does not trust Garibaldi due to his Republican beliefs. He doubts the outcome of the mission, and ultimately does not respect Garibaldi. However, the general responded by supporting it in the same manner. Cavour was almost relieved when he was informed that the expedition was taking place. It was a relief for him as it was unrelated to any revolutionary plot. He stood by the window watching. If things go wrong, satisfaction will double, while if things go well, there are thousands of ways to intervene and change future events in his favor. We will not recount the story of the Thousands expedition to Sicily here. But as Garibaldi crossed the strait to advance towards Naples, Cavour's anxiety and excitement increased. If Garibaldi crosses the strait and seizes Naples, he will become the absolute master of the situation. The king will lose the credibility of the Sardinian crown, which will only shine when reflecting the light of the heroic explorer. On September 8th at this point, Cavour, even if he wanted to initiate a dialogue with Garibaldi, could not do so. At the same time, Vittorio Emanuele showed no interest in going to Naples to receive the crown of the two Sicilies after what happened at Tiano. He wrote a letter to him expressing joy at his arrival in Naples, congratulating him on his achievements for the common cause, but also adding that no further expeditions should be carried out to Rome or any attacks without his authorization. King reaffirmed his absolute authority. Garibaldi responded on September 11th, setting up another meeting in Rome to crown himself King of Italy, while urging him to remove Cavour and all those obstructing my expedition. On February 18, 1861, upon returning to Turin, the last king inaugurated the first Italian parliament, with the only absentees being representatives from Rome and Veneto. Italy would be complete when they were present. The king's speech, which praised the army but did not mention Garibaldi, dissatisfied him. Instead of acknowledging him, King thanked the brave youth led by a talented captain. Cavour and Farini also failed to win Garibaldi's favor, as they should have included officers who had fought in the south under Garibaldi into the Savoy army, as Garibaldi had requested. This oversight angered Garibaldi deeply. The new legislative body began its work by discussing a bill proposed by Cavour to declare Vittorio Emanuele as the King of Italy, while the democratic faction led by Berferio wanted him to be known as the king acclaimed by the Italian people. Vittorio Emanuele insisted on being called the King of Italy, almost as a self-proclamation, choosing the title for himself and his successors as the monarchs of Italy. Furthermore, to reconnect with the tradition of him, he wants to be called not Vittorio Emanuele I, King of Italy, but Tukt. In short, Italy has been and will continue to be the Kingdom of Savoy. This is truly a project of Cavour, but what Democrats criticize the most is that the Kingdom of Italy was established as an extension of the old Piedmontese state, expanding its institutions to all regions, which they saw as a forced Piedmontization that would lead to complex issues in the future. The new system was based on uniform laws for all regions and relied on a bureaucratic apparatus directly dependent on the Piedmontese center. Therefore, civil and criminal laws of Piedmont were extended throughout Italy, with the Albertine Statute, thus becoming the Constitution of the Kingdom of Italy. Royal officials appointed were almost always officials from Piedmont, or in any case, from northern region. Refusal to comply with these orders led to the first resistance in the south, causing internal conflicts and uprisings that will go down in history as banditry. Due to the correctness of the constitution, Cavour submitted his resignation and that of the ministry so that the king could establish the first current ministry of the Kingdom of Italy. However, it was a formal move that almost cost him his job because the king tried to form a government even without Cavour. But since the majority of the alliance's members were loyal to Cavour's program, Vittorio Emanuele II was almost forced to hand over power to those who said he was the only one capable of solving all of Italy's issues, which made him quite uncomfortable, as in Villafranca. And for this reason, as if the precedent was insufficient, the king did not like him. He was not satisfied with Cavour's policy, which was linked to Napoleon III's policy, and did not address the issue of Veneto and Rome. He was concerned that Cavour was too focused on the unrest in Hungary. In fact, in his plan, not hiding from the king, he said that once Hungary rose against the Austrians, he would simultaneously have the Austrian army attack Veneto to recapture it. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. The British, with Russell, clearly told the king, who asked for their opinion on this issue, that if Cavour did what he intended, he would endanger his dynasty and kingdom, that Russia would help Austria and Britain could prevent an Austria-Italy conflict. However, the king brought Cavour back to power because he pleased the British, but now they no longer trust the count. Among other things, on the same day as the new legislative body, Garibaldi reappeared in Turin, criticizing the government and King Vittorio Emanuele, who was surrounded by a corrupt atmosphere. We hope to see him back on the right path, as he has done a lot, but unfortunately he did not achieve all the good things he could have done, which is truly an insult to the king and the parliament. The king wanted to avoid receiving him at the palace. Exactly 1 month later, on April 18th, fierce confrontation occurred in the chamber between Garibaldi and Cavour. This time, King had to intervene to reconcile, inviting Cavour and Garibaldi to the royal palace to explain. However, Garibaldi stubbornly refused, declaring that he would never meet, let alone shake hands with Cavour. Both were unforgiving towards each other. One wanted the other dead and vice versa. Everything was being decided at the Piedmontese parliament in Turin. Piemontesization led to opposition and uprisings from the military and the people of the south. No new politician has ever led the country in central and southern Italy. Cavour himself never ventured beyond Florence. He never wanted to go there to see if there were people, barbarians, or monkeys after Florence. He needs to learn more about ancient history. He knows nothing has yet to learn about Agrigento, Syracuse, or the wonders, palaces, temples, gardens, arts, philosophy, and civilization in this area and its surroundings. which existed 2,470 years before he was born in Turin. At that time, the land was covered by the mud of the Po River, with the first settlers cultivating the lands near Lake Viverone or in Lonzo. To enhance the vast land of his family in Piedmont, Cavour looked towards northern Europe, overlooking that the best and most beautiful agricultural gardens in Europe are located in Sicily. A lover of agriculture, he discovered a hidden heritage of infinite value in the southern land of the green gold mines, flying high, and something that even his successors, less visionary than him, never knew how to exploit. Indeed, they destroyed what even the Arab Bedouins appreciated when they invaded, showing the world its value and creating Conca d'Oro, with Aziz at its center, the Mediterranean flower of Palermo today. And the Normans did the same. Subsequently, politicians complained that riots were erupting in the south. In unison, they said it was the land of bandits. A fierce crackdown was led by sending 116,000 soldiers who captured and shot 5,212 bandits, as well as civilian leaders and many regular officers of the Bourbon regime in chaos, like the famous incident on September 8, 1943, with guerrillas in the mountains. The authorities defined the social uprising as a group of robbers, but it spread among the people in southern regions like Basilicata, Calabria, Campania, Puglia, and Sicily. The new rulers referred to the leaders of the resistance as robbers and used violent repression against them. Ironically, during the Civil War in 1861, military conscription and increased taxes were enforced in the South, affecting the ordinary people rather than the wealthy landowners. Even bread was taxed to pay off the enormous debts of Piedmont, which accounted for half of Italy's debt. Lombardy, with a surplus of 14, also fell into debt. Some industries emerged in the Salerno region but were moved to the north. Some even dismantled parts of the first modest railway line built in Italy then. Shipbuilding yards were closed down despite Italy's first steamships appearing. Ships were seized and banks were shut down. Furthermore, the lack of support for transportation by sea and rail from the Piedmontese people led to a setback in the export of fruits and vegetables, among other things, which were the main exports of the southern landowners. This lack of encouragement for industry and commerce eventually backfired, resulting in significant damage to the modernization of agriculture. As a result, during a crucial period of transformation in agricultural techniques and transportation, while the UK had 14,000 kilometers of railways, compared to just 100 kilometers in the south, it is clear that the neglect of these sectors in the south has caused irreparable harm. Facing fierce international competition, the mistakes made by Savoy in this decade will prevent the southern regions from catching up with other European countries currently operating at total capacity. With the first industrial machines producing machinery, railways, ships, and other infrastructure exponentially, all related industries are advancing rapidly. On August 20th, 1862, a state of siege was declared throughout Sicily, restricting freedom of the press and assembly, leading to the expulsion of suspected individuals to Savoy Piedmont at Fenestrelle. A military dictatorship was established with full authority to suppress dissent. Throughout that year, 6,800 people sought refuge in Egypt, a haven for Sicilians. In 1863, 7,000 fled, followed by 9,000 in 1864, 11,000 in 1865, and 18,000 in 1866. The average number of refugees per year was around 1,000 until 1897, increasing to 2,170 yearly from 1898 to 1914. Unfortunately, many of them were later used as cannon fodder in World War I. The fugitives who fled to Egypt were not robbers or thieves. They contributed to and built significant structures in Egypt, some of which are still a source of pride for Egypt today. Pyramid Railway, the tramway, museums in Cairo, theaters, banks, hospitals, dams, roads, and even the most critical mosque in Alexandria, El Rifai Mosque, were all constructed and decorated entirely by Letterio and Enrico Prinzivalli from Messina. This was a magnificent masterpiece of Italian art in Egypt. Prinzivalli left Messina in 1866, and he was not a criminal. However, those were terrible years of repression by the Savoy generals, who had an entire authoritarian leadership. They used an iron fist, imposed many death sentences, and forced labor on the rebellious troops. Some have argued that Risorgimento was almost purely a cultural activity, with economic benefits coming later, and that if it were solely for those, it would have achieved little. However, in reality, this is not the case, as seen in Germany's Zollverein, which shows that economic interests have driven and created political alliances in Germany. What brought about nationalism, even when taken to extreme levels later on, was not politics but economic interests, as seen in Hitler's Biography and the large industrial conglomerate. This is very different from the idea of a great nation that Frederick II shaped and later created, where strictness, economy, politics, and a large army, thus being a solid state, is one thing and cannot be separated. The unification of Italy and Risorgimento is a debate that has lasted for 150 years. It has not ended, continues. The debate became prominent in the 2000s. The standardization of religious adhesives, new customs, formal education, and the insincerity and weakness of people's movements were not enough to promote the idea of nationality. We see a revival of local values that disappeared just 30 years ago. Let's continue the discussion in chronological order, going back to 1860. On April 2, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele opened the 7th legislative body of the parliament. On September 20, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele rejected Cavour's resignation letter. Strong conflicts arose due to unclear support, secret or public, that the king gave to Garibaldi in the invasion of the south to merge the south and Sicily into the Savoy crown. After Sicily, Garibaldi marched towards Naples. On September 29, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele left Turin to take command of the army led by Garibaldi until they advanced towards conquering Naples. On October 8, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele declared before the people of southern Italy. On October 26, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele met Garibaldi at Tiano, who handed him what he believed was Italy. Conquest of Veneto and Rome was postponed. On November 7, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele entered Naples alongside General Garibaldi. On November 8, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele received a plebiscite from Sicily and Neapolitan from General Garibaldi in Naples. A rigged referendum took place. On November 22, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele received a plebiscite from Marche and Umbria in Naples. On the December 1, 1860, Vittorio Emanuele solemnly visited Palermo. On February 18, 1861, Vittorio Emanuele opened the 8th legislative body of the parliament. On March 17, 1861, Vittorio Emanuele promulgated the law by which he was named King of Italy. On April 18, 1861, Garibaldi delivered an angry speech accusing the cold and hostile hand of the ministry of wanting to incite a fratricidal war. The Plombieres agreements with Garibaldi were still on his mind, and his hostility towards his intervention in the south was evident. Feeling suspicious, Cavour reacted strongly by asking President Retazzi to reprimand the general for his actions, even though he was of noble origin and a partner in the ambitious plans of Napoleon III. At that time, Retazzi had suspended the session, and Nino Bixio tried to reconcile the two furious enemies who had been at war for years, but they ignored each other. As mentioned, one wanted him dead, and the other felt the same. Even with Mazzini, Cavour was also in a state of warfare, defining him as the leader of a fanatical band of assassins, as dangerous as the Austrian. The other did not remain silent. In an attack published in the newspaper Italia del Popolo, he wrote, "You have ignited a deadly dualism theory in Piedmont. You have corrupted our youth, replacing a deceitful and fake political system with the serene politics of those who desire a resurgence. Between you and us, sir, there is a deep divide. We represent Italy. You represent the suspicious ambitions of old autocrats. Above all, we seek national unity. You represent territorial expansion." Many years before, he did not keep quiet even during the Crimean War, a conflict that Cavour enthusiastically supported, and where he was a strong opponent of Mazzini. He told the departing soldiers, 15,000 of you are about to be deported to Crimea to serve a misguided foreign plan. Your bones will bleach under the hooves of Cossack horses in distant lands. You will die without glory, without splendor. On May 29, 1861, Cavour, who was supposed to meet the king that morning, was not feeling well. It was one of his usual illnesses. In fact, on the morning of the 31st, this illness seemed to have been cured. But by midday, it returned with more severity, characterized by fever and continuous delirium. He passionately talked about Italy and what he had achieved, and still wanted to achieve for Italy. Some speculated that he had a fever from malaria, while others believed it was due to overwork and intense conflicts with Garibaldi a few weeks earlier. However, this time, the illness was quite severe. By June 5, 1861, Cavour's health was deteriorating. Vittorio Emanuele visited Count Cavour, who was struggling to breathe. Despite many stories about his previous bouts with malaria, his death remained a mystery. The extract of a poisonous plant needed to be ground into powder to enter the bloodstream, causing brain congestion similar to malaria. Details about whether Cavour was assassinated remain unclear. On June 6, 1861, Count Camillo Benso de Cavour passed away at 51. He was born in Turin on August 10, 1810. Even though he was not assassinated, it is still strange that he died from a mosquito bite. Even more peculiar is that Vittorio Emanuele II also died from a mosquito bite. It could be said that Alexandrite always brings misfortune from Roman emperors to the present day. On June 8, 1861, Vittorio Emanuele called upon Marquess Ricasoli to take power. On October 10, 1861, Vittorio Emanuele sent Urbano Ratazzi to Paris to negotiate with Napoleon III on the withdrawal issue. On March 1, 1862, Vittorio Emanuele appointed Urbano Ratazzi to take power. On August 3, 1862, Vittorio Emanuele issued a statement opposing General Garibaldi's expedition to Rome. There were doubts about whether he genuinely opposed it or not. It was not like Cavour, but for appearance's sake, he also arrested him. On October 5, 1862, just 3 months after the arrest, Vittorio Emanuele pardoned General Garibaldi. On December 8, 1862, Vittorio Emanuele called upon Luigi Carlo Farini to take power. On March 24, 1863, Vittorio Emanuele appointed Marco Minghetti to take power. On September 11, 1864, Vittorio Emanuele accepted the September Conference. On September 23, 1864, Vittorio Emanuele dismissed Minister Minghetti and called upon General La Marmora to take power. 1865, on February 3rd, Vittorio Emanuele left Turin for the new capital, Florence. Hostile protests erupted in Turin as people felt deceived by this decision, leading to a bloody riot in the city streets, resulting in about 30 casualties. On February 23rd, 1865, Vittorio Emanuele returned to Turin to calm the situation. He explained his decision to the city by officially announcing his transfer to Florence in the Gazzetta on February 3, 1865. This move involved relocating 30,000 officials from Turin. Turin, once a political and economic hub in northern Italy for 300 years until the early 1900s when fiat was established and expanded, later became a simple town and lost its prominence. On March 7, 1865, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated works of art named after him in Milan. On May 14, 1865, after settling in the new city, Vittorio Emanuele unveiled the Dante Monument in Florence. On November 18, 1865, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated the 9th legislative body of the parliament in Florence. In March 1866, tensions between Austria and Prussia escalated, leading Otto von Bismarck to approve an alliance with Italy against their common enemy. In case of an Austrian victory, Italy would receive Venetia as compensation. At that time, it will be someone like us who will see later, in reality, cede Austria to Italy on May 5th through Napoleon III. On April 8th, after rejecting a peace agreement with Austria, Italy signed an alliance treaty with Prussia. According to this treaty, Italy would join the war alongside Prussia, and it was planned that both powers would not sign a peace treaty or cease hostilities with Austria without the other party's consent. On April 23rd, Austria began mobilizing forces at the Italian border in response to alarming weapon preparations in the army of the Kingdom of Savoy and among Garibaldi's ranks. On May 5th, Austria, through Napoleon III, attempted reconciliation and offered Veneto to Piedmont in exchange for breaking the alliance with Prussia. Italy refused, as they also wanted Trentino and Gorizia. Main challenge for the kings started when organizing the supreme command for the upcoming war against Austria. The army had 3 illustrious generals: military hero La Marmora from Crimea, Hero Cialdini from Pastrengo, and Chief of Staff Della Rocca, appointed by the king in 1859. These generals were born in a disciplinary revolution era, where they were promoted as commanders rather than obedient followers. Furthermore, there had been discussions about waging war against Austria for years. Still, none of these three generals had ever met to collectively study, evaluate, and propose suitable battle strategies based on different capabilities. The worst thing happened when La Marmora, the king, and the entire general staff discussed the final war plan, which was approved. Instead of handing it over to Cialdini for execution as he should have, La Marmora started discussing the plan with Cialdini himself. La Marmora planned to attack Mincio after Cialdini's troops redirected towards Po. At the same time, Cialdini wanted to attack Po on June 26 after the redirection to Mincio, which La Marmora should have executed 2 days earlier on the 24th. They were at odds and did not know what to do. Attack the quadrilateral fortresses. But not even in a dream did they believe that before the dual attack, the Austrian army would abandon the fortresses by retreating towards Vicenza and Padua. Cialdini would be defeated there after crossing the Po. And they still need to start evaluating which plan was the best. We know how everything ended. It was terrible. La Marmora plagiarized Cialdini's idea and then, as we will see later, went with the king on the Mincio to carry out a futile diversionary attack, followed by an assault that failed, then a retreat towards Oglio. At the same time, Cialdini not only did not cross the Po but, in panic, began to withdraw towards Modena. Regarding justifying each person's states, they have agreed that the two commanders will act autonomously except for assisting each other depending on the success achieved. In a strange project, if anything happens, help must come from one of the two, depending on the failures achieved. Because whoever wins can undoubtedly handle it without help. On May 12th, Vienna refused to participate in reconciliation, and diplomatic relations were strained when Austria set a condition that none of the participants in the conference would expand their territory. On the same day, Austria signed an agreement with France, Savoy's former ally, committing to neutrality and receiving compensation from Austria for Veneto, which would then be ceded to Italy. Remember this detail in exchange for recognizing the Pope's sovereignty over the states and ensuring that Italy does not fight too aggressively. This agreement raised suspicions even in Prussia. But even in Italy, Vittorio Emanuele and his government should also be suspicious. On June 16th, Prussia declared war on Austria and crossed the border. At the same time, the Italians were supposed to move according to a strategic plan that had been agreed upon. However, they did not move, which puzzled the Prussians based on the agreements. On June 17th, La Marmora left Florence after meeting with Cialdini to go to Mincio for the first planned military attack. On June 18th, the general staff prepared a declaration of war and sent it to Austria when the king intervened to delay it for 2 days. Once again, the Prussians did not understand why this was happening. Finally, on June 20th, the official declaration of war against Austria was announced in Verona. The king went to Cremona to oversee operations, then addressed the troops and approved the war plans presented by La Marmora and Cialdini. Another peculiar project that completely agrees is not to attack or besiege the fortresses of the Quadrilateral. It is an excellent gift for the enemy. Even more bizarre, here we see a genuinely illogical action where the main task is assigned to 8 departments, while the diversionary action is assigned to 15. The latter is attacked first. How can the others help? On June 20, 1866, Vittorio Emanuele made a nationwide speech declaring a new war against Austria. On June 20, 1866, Vittorio Emanuele summoned Count Ricasoli to join the government. On June 23–24, 1866, Vittorio Emanuele participated in the Battle of Custoza. La Marmora, urged by the skeptical king, carried out an attacking maneuver instead of a diversionary one. When La Marmora advanced, she discovered something strange. The Austrian troops had not destroyed the bridges when retreating, leading her to believe they would counterattack. The Austrians had left the bridges intact precisely to deceive them, secretly holding positions behind the Garda hills from Castelnuovo to Custoza on June 23rd. They were positioned southwest of Sona, at Santa Giustina and Santa Lucia, the exact hills La Marmora had designated as destinations for her units the next day, June 24th. This meant the Austrians were waiting for them in pre-arranged positions, ready for a surprise, perpendicular, the Mincio River. While La Marmora was more convinced than ever that no engagement could occur in the middle before reaching the hills, various generals, the king, and different commanders began to act naively as they did not know the enemy's location. Many Italian divisions unexpectedly came into contact with deployed enemy forces on the hills on both sides, resulting in a series of unrelated actions, with no orders knowing what was happening on their right and left. The king's residence passes by Mincio. The royal party proceeded to Villafranca during their retreat across the Pozzolo pontoon. While en route, whispers of approaching troops reached their ears. Believing them to be their forces, a messenger was dispatched immediately. However, upon reaching Montetorre Hill, the messenger realized the threat did not originate from their allies. As gunfire commenced, he discerned the aggressors as belonging to the Austrians. Simultaneously, High Command and La Marmora appeared on the battlefield without displaying outward hostility, despite the imminent threat. Despite the unknown, a glimmer of hope remained. King grew concerned regarding the defense of Custoza's position, but soon realized La Marmora's forces encircled the camp. This revelation confirmed the isolation of the royal party. In response, a decision was made to gather survivors from Montetorre and Monte Croce. However, La Marmora remained oblivious to the changing circumstances. The king also visited Tioni Bridge to organize the consolidation the remaining Brignone soldiers. Despite the poignant melancholy of the scenery, none of the soldiers obeyed his orders. No one knew him, and no one would willingly accept his command in such a difficult moment until the chief of staff intervened to relieve him from the hazardous area. He set off for Villeggio to meet La Marmora, but upon seeing the chaos unfolding, he continued southward towards Serlongo. La Marmora eventually arrived in Villeggio, but instead of proceeding to the Serlongo headquarters to meet the king, he continued to Goito during the turmoil. It was only at this point that La Marmora realized the futility of his futile attempts and acknowledged the devastating failure of his strategy. He recognized that the Italian forces had fought bravely and that a counterattack would likely lead to their destruction. The situation was not entirely dire. There was still hope. However, La Marmora and Cialdini later succumbed to the gravity of the situation and abandoned their initial plans. The first suggested withdrawal, while the other succumbed to threats and remained immobile instead of attacking, even withdrew southward to Modena. Only when Vittorio Emanuele realized his mistakes did he vow to rectify the two armies under his command. He realized that he had not only lost one of the divisions despite leading both, even without seeing the enemy. Thus, on June 24th, Conzelli's troops were decisively defeated in the Battle of Custoza by Archduke Albert of Habsburg despite having just 70 Vicus defenders. The Piedmontese soldiers did not know their enemy's position, strategic points, or where they should move. La Marmora panicked and immediately issued a retreat order. Unprepared for defense in either the prominent fortified positions at Villeggio or along the circular earthworks of Mezzo Castello on the Ponte delle Grazie, he retreated along the Mincio. While protocol demanded such a hasty withdrawal to be reinforced against forces guarding these territories according to regulation, Cialdini seemed to bypass all necessary defensive measures by retreating instead of attempting counteroffensives near Mezzo Castello, as was expected. The evacuation resulted in one of the most significant defeats ever suffered by the Piedmontese army. June 25th. The aftermath of the palace's upheaval had culminated with the king's evil displeasure. In his memoir, La Marmora della Rocca recounted that he stood before the king on that fateful day and readily accepted responsibility for his failures as chief strategist. However, his initial plan upon assuming office involved weeding out incompetent generals. This ambition sparked a heated exchange of words. On June 26, La Marmora resigned after not achieving what he desired. However, in his first report in 1868, he blamed everything on the king. He mentioned being appointed as chief of staff, where he could propose, suggest, advise, but instead was prohibited from acting independently. making clear, precise, absolute decisions, which goes against his nature, and often had to remain silent, concede, compromise. In reality, La Marmora always acted entirely freely. His resignation was his own decision, not imposed by the king, even following his orders while not obeying the king's orders. Furthermore, his telegram to Cialdini justifying his resignation still existed. Because too many of us are responsible, I suggest you take command with full authority to fulfill all the appointments you desire. Ultimately, he was the leader and had sovereignty. In conclusion, La Marmora even dared to overthrow the king. But at that moment, King telegraphed Cialdini to summon and grasp the situation on the 27th. Cialdini coincidentally did not retain immediate revenge and revealed the royal invitation to La Marmora, who was astonished. This is the atmosphere of cooperation. Following a series of failures, leading to numerous debates and criticisms, it was said that the military no longer trusted La Marmora. On the 28th, Vincenzo Ricasoli, a major general in the general staff, wrote a letter to his brother Bettino in Florence and others stating that orders need to be given to Cialdini to boost the morale of the army. General Menabrea also expressed similar sentiments. However, Cialdini clarified that he would only accept the position once the king abandoned the army. After receiving his resignation, La Marmora later requested identical conditions when the king initially refused, suggesting that he lead the army. Despite this, he promised to let it happen and avoid any actions that could cause trouble as long as it was beneficial for him in terms of the army and the preservation of the nation, because when a Prussian king had supreme command over the army, the Italian king could not fall behind. On July 3rd, a surprising turn occurred at Konigradsk Sadowa in Bohemia, where the Prussian army decided the fate of the battle after defeating the Austrian army. Following day, Vienna requested Napoleon III to act as an intermediary to end hostilities in Italy in exchange for surrendering Veneto. For 2 days, there was no news from Italy. On July 5th, instead of launching an attack on that day, all the generals were summoned to the king's headquarters in Sicognolo. In reality, Napoleon III sent a telegram from Paris to Vittorio Emanuele informing him that Franz Joseph had ceded Veneto to him, stating his willingness to accept his mediation to restore peace. Italy could achieve its goal through an agreement with France, where the country could quickly settle. To create even more chaos, Prince Napoleon began with another letter to the father-in-law of the king, suggesting that he should write a letter to the emperor to thank him for mediating, but also warning him that without an agreement with the Allied Berlin government, it couldn't do much and continued to attack vigorously. He was not entirely wrong legally and ethically. On April 8th, Italy signed an alliance treaty with Prussia, stating that both powers could not sign peace or ceasefire without the other's consent. Vittorio Emanuele attempted to devise a plan to respond to Napoleon, seeking appropriate words to make him understand the necessity of ensuring the dignity of a king. At the same time, he emphasized that occupying Trentino should be carried out by sending 1 or 2 divisions to support Garibaldi. This was because if a peace agreement were to be reached with us before occupying it, we risked not achieving peace. And he was not wrong that Italy would have it in 1919 along with Adige. Garibaldi and his volunteers were in Giudicari and achieved some success at Montesuello on July 3rd despite strong resistance from the Austrian army led by General Kuhn. Now, they are heading towards Bezzecca. July 8th, the French ambassador in Florence requested the government to suspend hostilities. Meanwhile, the emperor announced the arrival of the prince in Italy through written proposal. He softened the bitter pill by leaving a ray of hope that Veneto's annexation would occur through a referendum. Victor Emmanuel wanted to continue the bitter fight, and on the day, on July 9th, Bismarck reassured the Prussian government of his loyalty to the alliance treaty, indicating he would not sign. However, he engaged in discussions with diplomats who did not oppose ending hostilities, even though he kept his intentions secret from allies and was prepared to act if they betrayed him. On July 20th, Austria won the Battle of Lissa, prompting Prussia to agree to a ceasefire with Austria through a treaty on the same day. On July 21st, without informing the Italian government, Austria and Prussia signed a ceasefire agreement in Nikolsburg, initiating preliminary peace talks. Despite being a Prussian ally, Italy was not present at the negotiations and was only informed after the fact. With the prince in Ferrara and the French minister in Florence, a decision was made to direct negotiations with Austrian commanders regarding the ceasefire on July 23rd. This ceasefire came into effect on July 25th, paving the way for peace talks and the establishment of conditions. On August 12th, the Titti at Cosmons signed a 4-week ceasefire agreement, as ordered by La Marmora. In summary, it was La Marmora himself who ultimately saved the situation that had been damaged since June 24th at Custoza. Italy would have been saved from the most severe dangers, if not for him. If the Austrian army had not suffered a crushing defeat at Mincio, as they withdrew some divisions to fight on the Prussian front, now that peace had been established with Prussia, all their divisions would have been free to pour into Veneto. And Cialdini will also overpower him. With his current situation, they will push him back to Mincio. On August 9th, La Marmora sent stern letters ordering Garibaldi and Bezzecca to stop and abandon the occupied territories as a political urgency to end the ceasefire agreement. Garibaldi responded with the famous phrase, "I obey." However, this episode only entered into legend. Even though Garibaldi did not receive the famous 1072 letter from La Marmora, which he welcomed with his renowned expression, he continued his actions, possibly never reaching Trento. The Austrians withdrew from the Prussian army on July 21st through a ceasefire agreement, and on July 26, they signed a peace treaty with them. The Third Italian War of Independence has come to an end. The military and political failures exposed all the weaknesses of the new state, which was unable to compete with other European powers. On August 24th, the agreement between France and Austria regarding the transfer of Venice was signed in Vienna. The Italians were notably absent. Vittorio Emanuele was promised only a plebiscite in Veneto to pave the way for his accession, but the transfer took place even before the referendum. In 1866, on November 4th, Vittorio Emanuele received the plebiscite results from the people of Venice in Turin. Even today, in the Veneto region, they refer to this as the Burletta plebiscite because the battles had already occurred with Austria days before the vote. Before the referendum on October 22nd, Veneto was handed over from France to Italy in a room at the Europa Hotel along the Grand Canal. French General Leboeuf handed Veneto over to 3 prominent individuals: Count Luigi Michel from Venice, Edoardo de Betta from Verona, and Achille Emikelder from Mantua. They then transferred control to the king's representative, Count Genoa Taon di Revel. The international agreement between Austria and Prussia on August 23rd in Prague stipulated the transfer of Veneto to France, which would then hand it over to the Savoys. The Vienna Peace Agreement between Italy and Austria on October 3rd stated that the recognition of international rights to self-determination of the people of Venice depended on the lawful consultation of the population, who had sovereignty over their territory at that time. It is worth noting a hypothesis as Ambassador Habsburg in Paris, Metternich wrote to Foreign Minister Mensdorff Puy on August 3, 1866, about achieving the independence of Venice under a self-governing government like the former republic. General Buff informed Napoleon III on October 18 that he opposed the referendum decree issued by the King of Italy. Napoleon replied, "Let it go." In reality, France abandoned its role as an international guarantor and allowed the transfer of Veneto to the Savoy. Regarding the referendum, in May 1866, Silvio Ipani wrote that the city government prepared and distributed yes and no cards of different colors. Each voter introduced themselves to the polling station members, pronounced their name, and handed the ballot to the president, who placed it in the ballot box. The yes box was on the right, and the no box was on the left, a blatant threat. When entering polling stations, the posters displayed in all central cities are also very threatening, and indicate that you should vote in an upright position, under the sunlight, with God's blessing, not with trembling hands, secretly, like a criminal. Garibaldi was furious that the people of Venice did not rise independently, even in rural areas where it should have been easy. Only 30% of the population voted in the referendums, mainly in large cities, when there were 2,500,000 people. On November 7, 1866, Vittorio Emanuele formally visited Venice. Despite historical accounts portraying the event as orderly and joyful, with enthusiastic crowds and newspapers reporting positively, reality was quite different. There was no widespread participation, as depicted. Instead, Veneto's cultural heritage and language were systematically destroyed, leading to its denigration. Recently, some filmmakers have even mockingly portrayed Venice's servants or criminals, further disrespecting the region's identity and culture. Economic, industrial, agricultural, artisanal, and maritime aspects were neglected, causing people to revert to old habits. The anger of the Venetian people was expressed through bitter nursery rhymes that became popular among children. Every year from 1870 to 1880, there were 35 people from Venice for every person from Sicily, and for every person from Apulia, 41 people were emigrating abroad, especially to America. From 1881 to 1890, for every person from Sicily, there were 12 people from Venice, 25 from Apulia, and 125 from Umbria. From 1891 to 1900, for every person from Apulia, there were 18 people from Venice. For every person from Lazio, there were 25 people from Venice. And for every person from Sardinia, there were 39 people. In the following 24 years, 1,385,000 people from Venice emigrated abroad. The annual rates in the three periods above were 11.98 residents per 1,000, 20.31, and 33.85, respectively. Savoy brought a hunger Trojan, while no one else fake a Trojan. On March 22, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated the legislative bodies of the parliament. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. On March 22, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele invited Urbano Ratazzi to join the government. On May 30, 1867, Prince Amedeo, Duke of Aosta, son of the king, married Princess Maria Vittoria del Pozzo della Cisterna in Turin. On October 20, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele accepted the resignation of Minister Ratazzi and called for Cialdini to take over. On October 26, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele called General Menabrea to take over. On October 27, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele issued a statement opposing General Garibaldi's new expedition to Rome. On December 5, 1867, Vittorio Emanuele pardoned General Garibaldi. In 1868, on April 22, Prince Umberto married Princess Margherita of Savoy-Genoa, his cousin, in Turin. On September 24, 1869, Vittorio Emanuele promised Napoleon III he would help him in a potential conflict with Prussia while ensuring Italy's rights over Rome. On December 18, 1869, Vittorio Emanuele, believing he was close to death due to illness, married Rosa Vercellana, the Countess of Mirafiori, also known as Bella Rosina. On September 8, 1870, after recovering, Vittorio Emanuele wrote to the Pope, inviting Italian troops to enter Rome. At that time, the French were engaged in conflict with Prussia, which led to their defeat at Sedan and the capture of Napoleon III. By this time, the king no longer opposed attacking Rome. Italy was close to achieving its goal of making Rome the capital, as Vittorio Emanuele desired. The opportunity arose with the French defeat. On September 20, 1870, taking advantage of France's defeat and Napoleon III's departure, the Savoy troops entered Rome almost unopposed, leading to the Breccia di Porta Pia. On October 9, 1870, Vittorio Emanuele received the plebiscite in Rome in Florence. On December 5, 1870, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated the Festan legislative body of the parliament in Florence. On December 30, 1870, Vittorio Emanuele rushed to Rome, devastated by the Tiber's flooding. He spent the whole day visiting the most affected areas and left a large sum of money at the Capitol building for those who suffered damages. This allowed him to enter the future capital without the traditional ceremonies or the feared intolerance of Roman clergy and nobility associated with them. On February 3, 1871, Vittorio Emanuele enforced the law to transfer the capital from Florence to Rome. On July 2, 1871, he solemnly entered Rome. On November 27, 1871, Vittorio Emanuele opened the second session of the 5th legislative body in Rome. On July 8, 1873, Vittorio Emanuele called upon Marco Minghetti to take office. On July 17, 1873, he visited Emperor Francis Joseph in Vienna. On July 22, 1873, Victor Emmanuel visited Emperor William I in Berlin. On February 4, 1874, a dark day for the Italian education system as a rejection chamber voted 140 against 107 on a bill regarding compulsory primary education, free provision, and schools opening in central Italian cities where 71% of the population was illiterate. In contrast, Germany and Austria had only a 5% illiteracy rate. In Italy, 7 schools operated in 100 municipalities, all controlled by religious organization. Whereas in Germany and Austria, 95,100 schools were managed by the state. In some Italian cities, the situation was slightly better with schools funded by the city government. However, in small towns lacking resources, around 27,000 parishes exerted control, spreading anti-government sentiments led by criminal gangs and the bandit King Pius X, who manipulated ignorant citizens, creating fear and uncertainty. Religious entities strictly adhered to the famous treatise on education. I support providing formal education for the young nobles of wealthy families. Still, for those with humble status and poverty, it is heartening that the good father in the family is pleased that his children can read the lives of the saints while they focus on manual labor. Since education is expanding even to women, I'm afraid I have to disagree with it, as I fail to see how it could benefit society. Let mothers teach their daughters sewing, knitting, and other tasks suitable for women. As for reading, they should be taught basic literacy. 1874, on March 23, Vittorio Emanuele celebrated 25 years of his reign over illiterate Italians. On November 23, 1874, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated the 12th legislative body of the parliament. Subsequently, he would commence a series of meetings with European heads of state. On April 5, 1875, Emperor Franz Joseph visited Vittorio Emanuele in Venice. On October 18, 1875, Emperor William I visited Vittorio Emanuele in Milan. On March 13, 1876, Vittorio Emanuele called Agostino de Pratis to take office. On November 20, 1876, Vittorio Emanuele inaugurated the 13th legislative body of the parliament. On November 7, 1877, Vittorio Emanuele entered a civil union with Bella Rosina. This meant he did not pass on the Savoy dynasty inheritance to his children. In late December 1877, the king fell ill upon his return after a hunting trip. Some attributed this to contracting malaria while hunting in the marshy region of Lazio. On January 17, 1878, doctors declared that the king's days were numbered. Severe chills and fever had struck him on January 8, rendering him almost unconscious. Upon learning of Vittorio Emanuele's impending death, Pope Pius IX wanted to administer sacraments to him along with one of his representatives. However, Garibaldi refused, suspecting ulterior motives and perhaps to pressure him into retracting certain guarantees the Pope did not fully understand. He preferred his military rank over such gestures. Later, he sought help from his sons, but his ministers prevented him from accepting the final farewell from La Bella Rosina. On November 2, 1870, when the Piedmontese entered Rome, Pius IX declared the dogma of infallibility at the Vatican Council, rejecting the guarantees of Italy, excommunicating those responsible for the invasion, and calling on Catholics not to participate in the political life of this rebellious Italian state, a move that the Pope and the Church did not recognize. Furthermore, he went even further by issuing an excommunication against Victor Emmanuel II, declaring him the leader of a criminal gang, a king of thieves. Both adversaries were central figures in many events in Italy, and after both became widely known, they died within a few days. In fact, on February 7th, Pius IX, the last king of the Papal States, passed away after a papal reign lasting 31 years, 7 months, and 23 days, surpassing the reign of Vittorio Emanuele II, who ruled for 28 years, 9 months, and 18 days. However, it is essential to remember that during his papal reign, many death sentences were carried out against revolutionaries, Savoys, and Garibaldi, who opposed the temporary power of the Church. In fact, in Rome during his time, the guillotine was still in operation, and the executioner Mastro Tita, whose real name was Giovan Battista Bugatti, performed gruesome executions in the presence of kneeling soldiers. On January 9, 1878, at 2:30 p.m., Vittorio Emanuele passed away at the Quirinale Palace at 2:35 p.m., age 57 years, 9 months, and 26 days. He was succeeded by his son Umberto, who, 6 months later, on August 18th, was attacked by an anarchist. During a demonstration in support of the royal family for escaping the danger, another bomb was thrown into the procession in Florence, resulting in the death of 5 people and many injuries. Unfortunately, in 1900, another anarchist in Milan shot him in the chest. His son, Vittorio Emanuele III, then ascended to the throne. On January 17, 1878, Vittorio Emanuele II was buried at the Pantheon. Bella Rosina had never caused any scandals in Rome for 8 years, partly because she and her husband did not frequently participate in the social life of the Roman nobility, most of whom were clergy and did not have much sympathy for ordinary women. This made her quite popular among the familiar people. In her final years, she moved to the Beltrami Palace in Pisa, which the king had bought for their daughter Vittoria, and passed away there 7 years later in 1885. She was not buried at the Pantheon next to her husband, and she was never the queen. But his sons brought his remains back to Turin, where they built a small tomb similar to the Pantheon, later nicknamed the Tomb of Bella Rosina, which can still be seen. 1879, we end with the last main character after Cavour, Vittorio Emanuele and Pius IX, who are still alive and from Italy's famous Risorgimento period. That is, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who left political life with disdain this year and decisively withdrew to Caprera. He resigned as deputy by writing a heartfelt letter to the Roman newspaper La Capitale. I do not want to become one of the legislators of a country where laws are made only to ensure freedom for the enemies of Italian unity. He did not tolerate the compromises of the newly famous ones infuriated by corruption, disappointed by trials, and the weakness of 21 governments in 20 years. I dreamed of a completely different Italy in my lifetime, not this miserable Italy where internal freedoms are trampled, laws are ignored, and a country is humiliated even abroad. Even abroad, Italy benefits from the new protective customs duties imposed by other countries, which can go up to 30 to 40% on imports, especially in the textile industry, Italy's first huge industrial sector during the early Industrial Revolution. This has brought advantages to an industry that has experienced economic miracles in the Biella region, where it can be supplied quickly throughout Italy with its 400 factories. First and foremost, the new Quintino Sella factory immediately became the Biella region's largest factory. Coincidentally, Sella will find and even see the first Cassa di Risparmio. Ultimately, when you have a citizen as the Minister of Finance with great intelligence, even a small town, still partly medieval, like the former Biella, can take off. Only this very privileged area has the advantage of attracting cheap rural labor from the countryside to build large textile empires. Unskilled, weak, and even sickly rural laborers moved from the countryside to work in the large factories in Biella, where the demand for labor became very high. The workforce in the textile industry in the Biella area and surrounding regions, according to Villena's statistics in 1876, was significant. In 1848, Biella had only 8,767 residents, while Turin had 117,000. Just 28 years later, there were 282,131 workers in Biella, including 188,486 women and 90,083 children, with 25,000 aged 5 to 9 working 12 hours a day. The wage for an adult male worker was 1,502 lire. For women it ranged from 60 to 80 cents, and children received between 30 to 50 cents. This is equivalent to 1.2 cents for a loaf of bread, among other things when purchased. There was a notorious heavy interest-bearing loan known as the land tax levied on products, created by Menabrea in 1869 and tightened by Lanza following Quintino Sella's initiative in 1870. The significant income from people with low incomes or hunger tax has become almost indispensable. Many ministers in subsequent governments, especially the liberals, tried to abolish it, but it persisted until 1884. It supported a finance minister, Grimaldi, who prioritized budget needs over political needs, and the famous phrase, "I believe that arithmetic is not an opinion," became a proverb. Some explain Grimaldi's concept of arithmetic better by saying that if heavy taxes were imposed on jewelry purchased by the rich, the number of purchases would be minimal, and the total amount would be meager. However, if small taxes were imposed on those who only buy bread, including millions of poor people, the total revenue would be hundreds. Perhaps not only Garibaldi hoped for this, but all Italians, since the Risorgimento, dreamed of a different Italy in their lifetime. Unfortunately, many of their descendants would sacrifice in another bloody war in 1915 to 1918, followed by an even more horrific war in 1940 to 1945. The hesitancy and ambiguity are often seen in the three Savoy kings, even without Cavour, their admirer.